So, it seems as though something has led you to the campsite of the Orator. Well, as you can see, tonight I have stoked the fire, which means it's time to pull up your chair and settle in, because I have another tale to tell. What is that? In the distance? Tall with white wings and red eyes? Hark! The Mothman comes. But before we begin, if you find yourself enjoying this kind of content, first-hand true accounts of the supernatural, paranormal, things that go bump in the night, then allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, once on Monday and once on Friday, both at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, all of my stories are true first-hand accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. Today's story is, of course, the famous story of the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. But if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, then please reach out to me on any of my social media and we will find a time to get together, collect your story, and one day potentially feature it here on the Orator. And now, with all of that out of the way, let's get on to today's story. It is a tale that I call The Mothman of Point Pleasant. It's about 11:30 p.m. on November 15th of 1966. Steve and Mary Millette, along with Linda and Roger Scarberry, are out cruising in Roger's car. It's a 1957 Chevy, and basically they're in this place that they call the TNT. Not just them, but the entire town calls it this. And the TNT, it's this long strip of road outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And this long strip of road, it basically runs through this giant forested area. It's very curvy, but along it and throughout it, there is this military base. And it's this old World War II munitions area, which is why it's called the TNT, the explosives area. And it's pretty much abandoned at this point, and it's a great place for teenagers to hang out. There's a bunch of buildings out there, and they're all abandoned. Now, as you're driving through this area, it's very dark, there's no street lights, it's one road that cuts through this entire thing, and as you look around, you would see these tall igloo-shaped domes all over that are these old, bunkers and military pieces of this base. And so they're sort of just driving along that night, really just enjoying themselves. They didn't have an agenda necessarily. They were just two young married couples, like 18 to 20, and they were just out having fun late at night. They're just about to pull up to the actual gate that sort of introduces that portion of the road to the actual army base itself. And as they go around this curve and go by this gated area, suddenly they have to stop in the middle of the road. And in the background, Steve, he's in the back seat. He points at something and he's like, "Look at that. What is that?" And everybody looks, and there's something standing in the middle of the road. At first, they all think it's just a person, which would be really weird because they're a long ways out of town. Like I said, there's no lights or anything like that. Nobody should be out here at all, except maybe other teens doing stuff, but they wouldn't be just standing in the middle of the road. This is really dangerous. And so they stop and they're getting a look at this thing, and as they're looking at it, they're realizing this can't be a human. This thing is huge. It's 7 feet tall, at least. And it's all black, but it's got these white wings, and the white wings, they're tucked behind its back, almost like it's not flying right now, it's putting them away. But this thing, it's not a bird, it's not any animal they've ever seen. This thing looks like a human. It's bipedal, it's standing up on 2 legs looking at them, but they only get a very quick glimpse of it because the second their headlights sort of flash over this thing, it takes off running behind this power plant. Now, the power plant is one of these big power plants, and it's like one of the main buildings out here. And this creature, it runs behind it, and as they're watching it run, it doesn't run like anything they've ever seen before. They recounted later, it almost sort of like wobbled. It looked like it was having real trouble just running straight. It couldn't go that fast, and all of a sudden, it just disappears behind this power plant. And they're all looking at each other like, what could that have possibly been? When all of a sudden, Roger, who's the driver, he just starts getting out of there. And, his wife, Linda, she's like, "You gotta go. We gotta get out of here." I don't know what that was, but that was creepy. And so they start driving along this road again. And they get off of that road and they turn onto Route 62, which is like the main road that's going to take them from where they're at right now into town. And they start driving through Route 62. And they're going pretty fast because they're all a little spooked. And there's one rise that they go over, and then they come down, and they come up this second rise, and all of a sudden, there in the road, even though they've driven a fair distance, is this creature again. And it's standing on the side of the road, almost like it was waiting for them. And so they come up over this rise, their lights flash and shine on this thing, and now they get a better look at this thing. Like I said, 7 feet tall, all black, almost like it's furry, these giant white wings, and it had these huge red eyes. You know, Linda, later on when she's giving this police report and recounting this, she said they were huge and almost hypnotic. It's like when she looked into them, they were glowing almost like a tail light would glow. Like they weren't reflecting the light of their car. They actually glowed. And so this was really, really creepy. And again, their light falls on it. They get a pretty good look at this thing. And then all of a sudden, it shoots straight up into the air. And they said they could hear its wings flapping as it ascended. And now this time, there's no doubt. They didn't misunderstand what they saw. What they saw was something they just can't even explain. It's not a human. It's not an animal. It's not anything that has ever been seen before. And they are panicked. And so they start flying down the road in Roger's Chevy. And they're going really, really fast. Linda said she was screaming at him to go faster because of how scared they were. But he wasn't slowing down even for the breakneck turns. And this road, it's got some really crazy turns. And so they're flying along when all of a sudden, this creature, whatever it is, floats down above their vehicle. Now, they all said it never went in front of their car. It always stayed behind, which was really, really weird to them at first because they were going like 100 miles an hour, maybe 105 miles an hour, and this thing effortlessly kept up with them. They said they couldn't even hear the wings flapping, and when they looked, they didn't see it moving. It was like it wasn't flying. It was almost like it was just gliding behind them. And they all said the same thing. This thing looked like it was just not trying. Like this was so easy for it to go this fast, and yet it just stayed behind them. And so they're flying along these turns, like I said, 100 miles an hour plus. I mean, crazy. And all of them are just screaming at Roger, you gotta go, you gotta go. And up in the distance, they see the armory, one of these big buildings in this old World War II area. And as they're approaching the armory, you know, the armory has still got some lights functioning and it's all lit up. And as they're getting close to it, this creature flies up and dive bombs their car, and they hear it crash into the hood of their car, and then all of a sudden, they reach the area where it's all lit up, and then this thing takes off. And all of a sudden, they're realizing maybe this thing is scared of light because it's staying behind them in the dark, even though it clearly could go in front of their car, it's not. Every time that their lights seem to hit this thing, it disappears. And now all of a sudden in this well-lit area, it's gone. I mean, they're out looking at it as they're driving. You know, all the passengers are outside looking around, and it's just gone. And so they're very thankful, but they fly past the armory because they're still all terrified, right? And as soon as they get past this armory, right again, they're in the darkness on Route 62. Right away, this thing returns. It's like it was just lying in wait for them somewhere up in the sky. And once again, it floats right down by their car, and it's just hovering right behind them. And they're all looking at it, and it's dark, so they can't get a great look, but it's right there. And there's no mistaking that this thing isn't a creature like a bird or anything like that. Whatever this thing is, it's inhuman. And so they're going as fast as they can, and then they come up over the rise, and there's what they call the C.C. Lewis. It's this big farm, and there's a huge gate, and right after that gate is sort of when you would enter the town. And so they fly up on the C.C. Lewis, and once again, a ton of lights out there, and once again, as soon as they hit the C.C. Lewis, this thing flies away because all of this light. And right after that, they enter the downtown area. And as soon as they get out of that big stretch of long road and into the downtown area where everything's well lit, it's like this creature's totally gone. Totally gone. They don't see any sign of it whatsoever. And so they stop by this local place called the Dairyland, and they just, for a couple minutes, sit down, and are stunned. They're trying to go through what everybody saw, and they're sort of comparing stories, and everybody's story is basically the same. And so now they're figuring, what do we do next? I mean, they want to go to the cops, especially the girls. They're like, we should go to the police. Whatever this thing is, it probably is really dangerous. I mean, it's 7 feet tall with wings, and it was as fast as our car at 100 miles an hour. What could this even be? We need to alert somebody. But the guys are like, if we go to the police, not only will they not believe us, they're just going to laugh at us and think we're making up a story or something like that. What we need to do is we need to go out and find this thing again and figure out where it's at, and then maybe we can do something about it. And so the boys kind of convince the girls, all right, let's go back out there and see what's going on. And so they do. They pile back into Roger's car. They head all the way back to the C.C. Lewis farm, and they get right to that area when all of a sudden all of them are like, man, this is probably a bad idea. I think we should turn around. And so they stop the car around that area of the farm, and they go to turn around, and as they're turning around, their headlights, they illuminate a dead dog on the side of the road. And it was a really big dog, and it was not there before. I mean, they were all looking all over the place as they drove through that farm area. One of them, for sure, would have spotted this very obvious dead dog. And so they stop their car, and they're looking at this dog, and they're thinking, should we get out? Should we alert somebody? Should we go up to the farm? When all of a sudden, this creature, this moth-human hybrid thing, jumps over the back of their car, and they hear it scrape along the back of their car and take off out into the field. And all of a sudden, that was it. They went from trying to figure something out to being totally panicked. Roger right away flipped the car around and went straight back into town. And this time, instead of going to the Dairyland, they went to this local place called Tiny's Diner. And as soon as they pull into Tiny's Diner, this guy that they knew named Gary, he's a little bit older, he's coming out of the diner with a group of friends. And so right away, Roger, Steve, and Linda, and Mary, they all just tell Gary what they just saw. They're like, dude, you were not going to believe this, but they're all telling him the exact same thing. And he's kind of laughing at first. And he asks, have you guys been drinking? And he's trying to figure out what this prank is. But these guys are so panicked. And their story is so consistent. And they're like literally crying and yelling. And they're like, you have to believe us. And so eventually Gary does. And so he calls the police. And he just, says, hey, I got some kids here. And they need to tell you something. And so the police send somebody out to basically question them. And so this guy walks up, and he's just asking them some questions. Now, this guy's name is Deputy Millard Halstead, and at first, he's kind of the same as Gary. Super skeptical, doesn't really believe them, asking lots of detailed questions. But the longer he's questioning them, the more this is going from some tall tale, some ridiculous hoax, to he's thinking maybe these kids did see something, because they're all panicked. This clearly is not a joke for them. The girls are crying. The boys are yelling. I mean, they are truly freaked out. But also, he's asking them individual questions separately, and their stories are all completely lining up. There are no incongruencies. It's like whatever happened to them, their story is extremely concrete. It's all sounding exactly the same. And so, at some point, this officer is left to just think this must be at least to them true. Maybe it is worth checking out. And so the two couples, along with Gary and the police officer, they all head in that direction, out back towards the C.C. Lewis farm and the TNT area. And so they get to that farm area, and the two couples, they pull over, and they get out, and they're like, this is the last place we saw him. And also there was a dog here, and now the dog is gone, and there's a little areas where it's like disturbed and stuff like that. And so the police officer, the deputy, he goes out into the area, the fields, and all that, and he's looking around with his flashlight. And for about a half an hour, they search the area, and they just don't see any real evidence of anything. It's like there are these little pieces of stuff, there's like scrapes and stuff like that, but overall, they don't see the creature again. They don't see any other real evidence, except the kids remembered, those young married couples, they remembered that this creature descended on their roof and slammed into their roof. And they're like, it hit our car a bunch of times. There should be marks. And so the deputy checks their car, and sure enough, all over the top of this car are scratches. And, Roger, he's like, this is my prized possession. I take great care of this car. These were not here before. And so, unfortunately, that's the only real evidence they get that night. Now, at this point, it's like 12:31 in the morning, and so it's kind of time for everybody to just turn in anyway. And so, the deputy, he says, don't worry, tomorrow we'll come back out and we'll look. And so over the next couple of days, they would launch a big investigation where they would go out to that entire TNT area and they would check the buildings out there. Reporters eventually got called in. And basically, over the next few days, they found a big footprint that nobody could explain exactly what it was. They went to the actual power plant where they first saw this creature. And, the two married couples and the police and some of the reporters, they went into this power plant and they're looking all over. And so they're all searching this giant power plant. And while they're in there, one of the boiler room doors, Roger remembers that he had opened it because he thought he had saw something, in that room. And so he left that door open when they left. And so they get all the way outside. Everybody's outside when all of a sudden they hear this giant boom from inside the power plant. And so they all run back in there. And that door that Roger had just left open, this giant, heavy metal door, was now completely closed. And so they're like, even if a creature's in here, something's in here, and none of us are seeing it. And so they continued on the investigation. Over the next year, there were over 100 different sightings of this Mothman creature. And it grew so much that it became a real legend in this area. The legend of the Mothman of Point Pleasant. I mean, people were seeing it all over the place. And for the next year, these sightings continued until there was this local bridge, the Silver Bridge. And it was only about 40 years old, a little less than 40 years old. And all of a sudden it had this, basically like a mechanical failure, and it collapsed. And unfortunately, some people perished in the accident. And everybody in the town was like, this is such a new bridge. What could have possibly happened? And the theory is that while the Mothman, of course, did not cause this, they ended up figuring out it was a structural integrity problem with the bridge. But they thought that the Mothman was almost like a harbinger of doom. That he was somehow trying to bring awareness to the fact that disaster was going to strike in this area. Now, whether or not that's true, nobody can say. But what we can say is since 1966, there have been hundreds, if not thousands, of sightings of the Mothman of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. And so that's going to do it for today's story. If you found yourself enjoying this story or any of the other ones on my channel, then please allow the spirits to guide your planchette to both the like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell. That way you get notified every time I upload new content, which is twice a week, every Monday and Friday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. Second, of course, all of my stories are first-hand true accounts of the supernatural and paranormal. So if you or anybody you know has a story and you think it would fit well on my channel, please reach out to me on any of my social media and we'll find a time to get together, collect your story, and potentially one day feature it here on the Orator. And so until next time, where you see that the fire is stoked, you'll pull up your chair and settle in, and I'll have another tale to tell.